Good morning, sweet friends. It is another episode, but this time there is going to be a two-part series because we're going to go through Moses' life, and then we're going to have a part 2 to this that is going to do a deep dive into all the plagues and the false gods and the way that that relates to how we, in turn, bring those same false gods as idols back to our everyday life. So, enjoy this two-part series on the life of Moses. Let's get started. Moses' life, Exodus through Deuteronomy, shows how God raises a deliverer through hidden years, resistance from powerful opposition, long wilderness seasons, to bring about a freedom of an entire people. There's a cat running around the floor, so if you hear something, it's just her. Born in a time of oppression, Exodus 1 and 2. I'm going to read the summaries of Exodus 1 and 2. Summaries. Exodus 1 begins the story of how the Israelites went from honored guests of Egypt to oppressed slaves. After the time of Joseph, a new Pharaoh came into power in Egypt who did not remember Joseph or all that he had done for the nation. The Israelites had grown numerous and strong, fulfilling God's promise to multiply them. Fearing their increasing population, Pharaoh worried that they may join Egypt's enemies in war and leave the land. So he enslaved them and appointed harsh taskmakers over them. They were forced into hard labor building the store cities of Pithom and Ramesses. If I name any of these wrong, sorry, I'm not a theologian, so just bear with me. I barely can read. Pharaoh then ordered the Hebrew midwives, Sapphira and Puah, to kill every Hebrew baby boy at birth. However, the midwives feared God and refused to obey. Because of their faithfulness, God blessed them and continued to increase Israel. Finally, Pharaoh commanded all the people to throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River and letting the girls live. That is Exodus 1. Exodus 2 tells the story of the life of Moses and how God preserved him and began preparing him to deliver Israel. A Hebrew woman gave birth to a son during a time when Pharaoh ordered Hebrew boys to be killed. She hid him for 3 months, and then when she could hide him no longer, she placed him in a basket along the reeds of the Nile River. And Pharaoh's daughter found the baby, had compassion on him, adopted him as her own son. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's household, yet he was a Hebrew. A note right here that I love, this actually in the scriptures, is the fact that Moses being born, his mom got paid to nurse her own baby. Not only did he survive, but she got paid. And that is amazing that God just she raised her own kid and got paid for raising her own kid, even though he was supposed to die. That is just God altogether. When Moses grew older, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. In anger, Moses killed the Egyptian, hid the body, and the next day, Moses tried to stop 2 Hebrews from fighting. One of them confronted him, and then Moses realized his actions were known. Pharaoh then sought to kill Moses, so Moses fled to the land of Midian. In Midian, Moses helped defend the daughters of a priest named Jethro and was welcomed into his home. Moses married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and then they had a son named Gershom. Moses settled as a shepherd. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, the Israelites continued to suffer under slavery. They cried out to God, and God heard their groanings. He remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he saw their suffering, and he was concerned for them. So Pharaoh ordered all the Hebrew baby boys to be killed. Moses' life began under a death sentence. His mother's faith preserved him. The principle in these 2 chapters is deliverers are often born in the middle of a crisis. Raised in the house of an enemy, Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace. Educated by Egyptian wisdom and leadership. God used the enemy's resources to prepare a deliverer. The principle here is that God will use unlikely environments to train you for his purpose. Don't count out all of the things that come against you, the trials, the things. You don't know what God's preparing you for. And like I've mentioned in other video series, when you think your world's falling apart, it may just be falling into place. God has a purpose for everything. A premature attempt at deliverance. That was his problem, is he felt that leadership and he wanted to do something, but he did it out of God's timing when he tried to overthrow the Egyptians then. So, Exodus 2, 11 through 15, says, "Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens, and he saw the Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of the brethren. So he looked this way and that way and saw no one, and he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And then he went out the second day, and behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to the one who did wrong, 'Why are you striking your companion?' Then he said, 'Who made you the prince and judge over us all? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?' So Moses feared and said, 'Surely this thing is known.' When Pharaoh heard of the matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well." Moses killed an Egyptian trying to defend the Hebrew. He acted in passion before God's timing, and he was led into exile in Midian. The principle here in Exodus 2, 11 through 15 is calling without timing leads to failure, but God can still redeem it. Praise the Lord. 40 years in the wilderness before the call. Exodus 2, 16 through 25. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to drew water, and they filled the troughs with water to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon?" He said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hands of the shepherds, and he also drew water for us and watered our flock." So he said to his daughters, "And where is he? And why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses. She bore him a son, called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of their bondage. So God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. Moses spent 40 years in exile in Midian. His wilderness was before he was to lead others. He had to go through 40 years of his own wilderness before he was equipped to lead others through a wilderness. From prince to a shepherd, hidden, forgotten, and humbled. Learning patience, solitude, and dependence. Those are wonderful attributes. The principle here in Exodus 2, 16 through 25. The wilderness prepared the leader before the leader leads others through the wilderness. The burning bush, God's initiation. This is Exodus 3. Summary. Exodus 3 records a powerful moment when God calls Moses to deliver Israel. While tending the sheep near Mount Horeb in the wilderness of Midian, Moses saw a bush that was on fire but not consumed. When he went closer, God called from the bush and told him to remove his sandals, for he was standing on holy ground. God revealed that he had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt and had heard their cries. He declared that he would deliver them from their slavery and bring them into a good and spacious land flowing with milk and honey. Then God told Moses that he would be the one sent to Pharaoh to bring Israel out of Egypt. Moses felt inadequate and he questioned God. Who am I that I should go? And then he just said, what is your name? God responded with reassurance and revelation. He promised, I will be with you. And he revealed his name as I am who I am, Yahweh, the self-existent, eternal God. He instructed Moses to tell the Israelites that I am had sent him. God also foretold that Pharaoh would resist, but he would stretch out his hand with mighty wonders, and ultimately he would deliver Israel. So the burning bush was God's initiation. God called Moses, not the other way around. Holy ground, holy mission. Moses' insecurities met God's assurance, the great I am. The principle here is God's calling is based on his sufficiency, not your confidence. Reluctancy, and excuses. Exodus 4. In Exodus 4, God reassures Moses and equips him for the mission, despite Moses' fear and doubt. Moses worried that the Israelites would not believe that God had appeared to him, so God gave him 3 miraculous signs for himself at that moment. His staff turned into a serpent and then back into a staff. His hand became leprosy and then was healed. Water from the Nile would turn into blood on the ground. All these signs would prove God had truly sent him. And then, after miracle, 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 wonders like I've never seen, Moses then expresses his insecurity about his speaking ability. Says he's slow of speech. God reminded him that he is the creator of his mouth and promised to help him speak. When Moses still hesitated, God got a little angry, but he also provided help by appointing his brother Aaron to speak on his behalf. Aaron would act as Moses' spokesperson. Moses returned to his father-in-law and began his journey back to Egypt. Along the way, God emphasized the seriousness and obedience of the covenant, and Zipporah intervened and protected Moses by circumcising their son. When Moses and Aaron met, Aaron spoke to the Israelites and performed signs. The people believed, and when they heard that God had seen their suffering, they bowed down and worshiped. Moses was very reluctant. He gave all the excuses in the world, probably some of the same ones we give. Who am I that you would want me to do this? They're not going to believe me. I'm just so-and-so. I'm not eloquent in speech, and I don't know how to talk to people like that. God answered every excuse and sent Aaron to help. The principle here is God does not require perfection. He requires obedience. Direct opposition from Pharaoh. Exodus 5 through 12. And we will go into a deep dive in part 2 of this. Every time Moses obeyed God, Pharaoh made things worse. He increased the labor of the Israelites, hardened their hearts after every plague, refusal to release control. He did not want to give up control over all that he had. Obedience often increases opposition before a breakthrough comes. The plagues versus the false god, and this will come in part 2 in a deep dive. The plagues were not random. They actually confronted Egypt's gods. This principle, deliverance reveals who the true God is. Passover deliverance through blood, Exodus 12. The blood on the doorpost spared Israel. This is a summary of Exodus 12. Exodus 12 records the first Passover and Israel's dramatic deliverance from Egypt. God gave detailed instructions to Moses and Aaron for a new beginning. This month would mark the start of Israel's calendar. Each household was to select a spotless lamb, kill it at twilight, and place its blood on the doorpost and the lintel of their homes. Then they were to eat the lamb roasted with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, dressed and ready to leave quickly. That night the Lord would pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both human and animal, but he would pass over the homes marked with the blood of the lamb. The blood would be a sign of protection. At midnight, the final plague came. Every Egyptian household experienced loss, including Pharaoh. In grief, Pharaoh commanded that the Israelites leave immediately. The Egyptians urged them to go and even gave them silver, gold, and clothing. So Israel plundered Egypt as they departed. About 600,000 men, plus women and children, left Egypt, along with many others who joined them. They baked unleavened bread because they left in haste and had no time for the dough to rise. God established the Feast of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread as lasting memorials so that future generations would remember how he delivered with a mighty hand. So, the blood on the doorpost spared Israel, a picture of redemption and protection portrayed by Jesus the Lamb on the cross. Freedom always involves sacrifice. And Jesus Christ is the one who sacrificed it all so that we could have freedom. The Red Sea, no way out but God. Exodus 14. Exodus 14 tells the story of the parting of the Red Sea and how delivering Israel from Pharaoh's army. After the Israelites left Egypt, God led them into a camp near the Red Sea. Pharaoh changed his mind about letting them go and pursued him with his army, chariots, and horses. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites became terrified and cried out in fear, questioning Moses and wishing that they had stayed in Egypt. Moses told the people not to be afraid and assured them that God would fight for them. God instructed Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea, and the Lord caused a strong east wind to blow at night, dividing the waters and creating a dry path across the sea, through the sea. Then the Israelites walked on dry ground, not muddy ground, dry ground, with the wall of water on both sides. Pharaoh's army chased after them into the sea. When all the Israelites had safely crossed, God told Moses to stretch out his hand again, and the waters returned to their place, drowning Pharaoh's entire army. Not one of them survived. Israel saw God's great power and victory, and the people feared the Lord and believed in him and his servant Moses. So it looked like there was no way out. They were trapped by the sea. Trapped between the sea and Pharaoh's army, God made a way where there was none. God sometimes leads you into the impossible situations to display his power. The wilderness, from slaves to a nation. This is Exodus 15 through Numbers. Let me see if I got any on that. No. And we will bypass this. Go back and read all of these references for yourself. The wilderness is not a punishment. It was a transformation. In the wilderness, they learned to trust God for their daily manna. They received the law. They learned obedience and worship. Their slave mentality had to die in order for them to actually experience true freedom. The principle here is freedom from bondage is immediate. Freedom from the slave mindset is a process. Constant complaining and leadership pressure. The people longed to return to Egypt. They blamed Moses for their hardship. They carried emotional and spiritual weight for them. He carried emotional and spiritual weight for them because he felt responsible in a way. Leaders often bear the frustration of the people they are trying to help. Isn't that the truth? That will go into a deep dive. And that relates back to the previous thing I did a couple of days ago on trying to be the Holy Spirit for others. Intimacy with God happened in Exodus 33. The Lord spoke to Moses face to face. His leadership flowed from a relationship, not a position. Public authority comes from private intimacy. You have to have your time with God. You have to. Intercession for a rebellious people. Exodus 32. This is a summary of 32. 32 tells the story of Israel's rebellion with the golden calf while Moses was on Mount Sinai, receiving God's commandments. While Moses was delayed on the mountain, the people grew impatient and asked Aaron to make them gods to lead them. Aaron collected their gold and formed a golden calf. The people worshipped it, offered sacrifices, celebrated, saying this was the God who brought them out of Egypt. God saw their sin, told Moses that the people had become corrupt. His anger burned against them, and he spoke about destroying them and starting all over. But Moses interceded for the people, pleading with God to remember his promise. Because Moses interceded with God, God relented from completely destroying them. So before Moses sees the people, he asked God, please don't do that. You brought them out. It would be better if you leave them because, you're God and you called them out here. And it's going to look better as a witness if you don't kill them when you get them out here. And then Moses comes down from Mount Sinai after pleading with God to spare their lives, saw the calf and all the celebrations, and he burned with righteous anger. But he threw down the tablets of stone, which God had given him, breaking them. He destroyed the calf, ground it into powder, mixed it in the water, and made the people drink it. Moses confronted Aaron. Aaron admitted that the people pressured him. Moses then stood at the camp and called those who were faithful to the Lord to come to him. And the Levites responded, and they carried out judgment on the rebellion, and about 3,000 people died that day. Afterward, Moses returned to God again and pleaded for mercy, even offering himself in the place of people. God spared the nation, but declared that there would still be consequences for their sins. When Israel sinned with the golden calf, Moses interceded with them. A true deliverer stands between God's judgment and the people. That is when we righteously correct. Christians, not unbelievers. They are not walking in righteousness, so we do not judge unrighteousness in unrighteous people. God is the judge of that. We are just to speak the truth only to them. The promised land he would not enter. Deuteronomy 34. Deuteronomy 34. Because of his disobedience at Meribah, Moses saw the promise, but he did not step into the promised land. The principle here is faithfulness to God's mission is more important than the personal reward. I do also want to jump back here and talk about one thing that is not on my list, and that is in Exodus 34, after the golden calf incident, Moses ascended to Mount Sinai again to meet with God. God instructed him to cut 2 new stones tablets and replace the broken ones, the ones he broke in anger. So the first time God provided tablets for him, but because he broke them, he in turn had to cut his own stones because out of anger, he threw them down. And God didn't call him to break them. God revealed himself to Moses in a profound way, proclaiming his name, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. God gave Moses commands to living holy, including instructions for festivals, observances, Sabbaths, and prohibiting idolatry. These rules reaffirm the covenant, showing that God declares both relationship and obedience. That's really good. So let's talk about our summary theme. So the stage, what it looked like, and what God was actually doing. The stage, birth under threat, what it looked like, danger, what God was doing, preserving a deliverer. Stage, the palace life, what it looked like, privilege, what God was doing was training a leader. Stage, killing Egyptian, what it looked like, failure. What God was doing, was redirecting his path. Stage, Midian wilderness. What it looked like, obscurity. What God was doing, humbling and preparing. Stage, burning bush. What it looked like, fear. What God was doing, calling and commissioning. Stage, Pharaoh's resistance. What it looked like, opposition. What God was doing, displaying God's power. Stage, Red Sea. What it looked like, impossible. What God was doing, demonstrating deliverance. Stage, wilderness. What it looked like, delay. What God was doing, forming a nation. Stage, intercession. What it looked like, burden. What God was doing, revealing God's mercy. Stage, promised land. What it looked like, loss. What God was doing, completing a mission. The big truth from Moses' life is God uses hidden seasons, fierce opposition, and long wilderness experiences to shape a deliverer who can lead others into freedom. Be the one who speaks truth, leads in truth, loves others. Not judge, love. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Stay tuned for part 2. It is going to be a good series.